The alarm chimes clean and small, right in the middle of a torque mark I can't stand out, and I drop a wrench so it clanks against the concrete like a gunshot. It's 9:15 a.m. on a Thursday. Light through the shop windows is thin and winter bright. I wipe my hands on the back of my pants, taste oil and cardboard, and tap the screen on the console. The camera feed pops up, 6 people frozen on my circular stone drive, clustered like a bad photo someone couldn't crop. The chime repeats, insistently domestic. My breath cuts short. The wrench in my hand suddenly weighs more than the truck I loaned to the first crew. Cold coffee on the bench goes unnoticed until I knock it with my elbow and it sloshes, dark and bitter like an accusation. I know the faces before I register them, not because they're familiar in a friendly way, but because my head has been saving them as labels for years. Margaret, Jessica, David, Caleb, Noah, Ashley, names that used to be the whole point of holidays and church lunches and Sunday costume changes. The camera angle is honest and indifferent. The drive shows Ryan's battered sedan parked crookedly near the mailbox, its bumper taped, a dent that looks like an old apology, and a rented SUV with faded stickers idling like a fake alibi. Seeing them there after 7 years is not a surprise, and it is not random. It lands in me like finding a hairline crack running through the foundation of a house you built yourself. I can feel the small, precise hot slide of panic, and then the slow, clinical settling of muscle into decision. My shop is quiet aside from the beep, and I notice details as if my mind is being careful not to hand over ownership in panic. The concrete is still dusty where I poured it the first summer I could afford a crew. The 3-bay doors gleam dull under a thin film of pollen from spring, and behind me a shelf holds the permit folders I learned to fold myself. For a second I'm cataloging equipment, commercial mowers stacked like sleeping artillery, the skid steer tarp tucked over its teeth, because objects are honest in ways people are not. I am 34. I have been outside the family orbit for 7 years, and every muscle remembers the moment I chose this life over the expectations they rehearsed for me. Suit, predictable office, a last name that paid for comfort. I chose soil and sweat instead. A $25,000 loan on a truck, a tiny garage apartment, and weekends that paid between $900 and $1,300 while I learned how to read grading plans and coax irrigation to a bay. My first instinct is to close the shop door and go back to work. There's safety in motion and in decisions that leave no room for negotiation. But my hands won't stop shaking enough to keep the phone steady, so I walk to the bench and put the coffee down as if setting a ritual. The air smells of diesel and sawdust and something I have earned, and that smell has been my company more honestly than anyone else in a long time. I remember counting savings on a milk crate, $18,500 by graduation from the one-man hustle, the exact number like a talisman against the voices telling me I was making a mistake. I remember nights estimating bids until my eyes blurred, the first time a landscaper paid me in praise and then in checks. The first weekend I made enough to fix the dents in Ryan's old sedan because family had a way of asking without hearing the answer no. On the screen, the cousin's breath fogs in the cold. Margaret's gloved hands are folded so I can't tell if she's praying or checking her nails. Ashley, the redhead I don't know, stands in the middle, heels on winter grass like she's ready for a meeting and not a family crossing. They look at the house the way people look at trophies they did not polish. For a moment my mouth tastes metal. The house is mine in the way that matters. 800 square feet not bought with luck, but with contracts that started with a rooftop planting downtown and a private club renovation, lawns that led to estates. 6 acres, a pond I dug myself by hand on nights when asphalt seemed kinder than memory. The camera shows the work, not the work that built me, but the work that paid for it. Their faces shift as they take that in. Entitlement curdles into calculation too quick to be called grief. I am acutely aware of how calm I look in the feed, how still and contained, a portrait of restraint that masks a weatherboard of rage beneath. My heartbeat is a metronome I can ignore if I choose, and I choose to be precise because precision is how I built a business from a tub of screws and a rusty shovel. The chime pings again, tinny and very small, and I tell myself I will open the door when I am ready, because everything I have learned about the world says that people come to the table when they want something, and they leave when they finish taking it. I set the wrench down carefully, the clack sharp and final, and I walk toward the door with my hands empty. I freeze with my hand on the doorknob and watch the feet again, because watching is safer than answering. On screen their breath hangs in the cold air and their coats bloom like bad decisions. They whisper and shift weight from one foot to the other like people avoiding a puddle. I tell myself I'll pretend I'm not home. These are the same people who used to slide me out of group pictures and excuse me from graduation cake and weddings with small, efficient lies. I stand there with my palm on cold metal and feel the shop tick under my shoes. The concrete remembering every night I slept on its edges to save a few extra dollars. The house sits there on the camera the way I see it in real life. 4,800 square feet of careful choices, all of them earned. The stone entry is heated. It throws up a faint halo of warmth that the winter wind can't quite steal. Walnut beams run like dark ribs over the entry, custom millwork cut and sanded until the wood smells like a place you could finally stay. The three-bay shop behind the house has the lift still raised, the commercial mowers lined up like disciplined soldiers, the skid steer parked to the side under a tarp, and the garage shelves full of parts and permit folders stacked by job number. I know every scratch on that lift and every dent in those trailers. They are how I remember the nights I learned my trade. Outside the house, the engineered pond reflects a low, gray sky, its edge planted with native grasses and sedges that bend together and make the place feel less like a show and more like a deliberate thing. I dug that pond with two hired hands and my own two hands when the first big check cleared. The plants along the edge are the kind I fought to get past clients who wanted plastic no-maintenance beds. They look right because they belong to the land and because I insisted. The driveway curves around a circular stone island where a winter wreath has frozen to the center. And I think about the iron forges and the back-breaking bids it took to get here. The $25,000 truck loan that swallowed a year of dinners and dignity. The tight weekends where I brought home $900 to $1,300 and counted every bill twice before I slept. They cluster at the gate and it becomes choreography. Shoulders in, heads bent, someone scrolling, someone taking pictures, someone laughing a little too loud as if laughter could make them family again. Jessica angles her phone to take a shot of the entry while Margaret leans on Ryan the way people lean when they're testing balance, measuring whether they can anchor here. David keeps looking at the truck with an opinion on parts he never asked me about when I was kids, play money in his pockets. Caleb and Noah drift like vultures pretending to be flowers, fidgeting with gloves, checking the rental SUV's faded sticker like it's a witness to their good intentions. Ashley takes pictures of the walnut beams, turning slowly as if a realtor had trained her how to appreciate lines and light. Their smiles are tight, their eyes keep going back to the shop and to the truck, as if this property is a set of pockets to be emptied politely. My stomach turns because the scene is painfully familiar and morally blunt. They are there to inventory what I made without them. I watch the way they speak quietly so their words don't carry, the angles of their faces when they trade glances. Every click of a phone camera feels like a receipt made in real time, a log of assets they might later mention offhand. We saw it, it exists. I think of the nights I gave up on family dinners to learn sprinkler flow rates, the times I sent Ryan $20 to patch a tire and was excused the next time the family needed a photo op. The contrast between how they once used me and how they look at what I own now is a kind of violence that sits in my gut like swallowed glass. For a while I do nothing but watch them move, a passive operator observing the wildlife at the edge of a preserve I built. I pretend I'm not home because pretending is a tool I've had to use before. It keeps the moment from turning into a hostage situation where old words like responsibility and family are used as levers. But the cameras lie by omission. They don't capture the way my hands want to clamp down on the gate or the way my chest tightens around the memory of being moved aside at every milestone. I let them stand there and I let them take pictures because the proof of intent is better than any first blow. Their nervous glee feels transactional, grins that are untilled ground. They are scouting, not returning, and I watch their choreography like a mechanic watching a failing engine until I can hear exactly which part will fail first. I think about where the wedge started because I like to know where pressure comes from before I decide how to pry it out, and the memory snaps into place quick and exact. Birmingham, a middle-class split level with vinyl floors and a yard Mom bragged about but never let me touch. My parents were Mark and Lisa, people who learned to measure success in degrees and desk jobs, the kind who nodded approvingly at college brochures and frowned at grease on work boots. Ryan slipped easily into that map, all bright shoes and tidy answers. I watched them cheer for him like applause could hold him up forever. Grandma Margaret's house was our arena every holiday Sunday, the smell of pot roast and the clink of her pearls announcing status more plainly than any conversation. The table had a doorway that preferred important people. Ryan sat at the right hand of the matriarch, an honored place kept in cloth napkin folds. I sat farther down, elbow at the edge, a place you could slide out of without anyone noticing the gap. Jessica and David steered the topics away from anything that might make their children uncomfortable, like blue-collar trades. And if I started to mention a project, my voice would go small until someone smoothed it over with a joke. When I was 15, I cobbled together a raised bed for Mom's herb garden, a thing I was proud of because I'd planned the drainage and saved the screws. I brought it to Margaret's when she asked to see what I'd been doing. The laughter was soft and precise, the kind that cuts and then files away the piece they don't like. "That's cute," someone said, like a nickname you outgrow. "He's handy," said another, as if my work belonged in the same family of things as changing a headlight. They applauded in the way people applaud children at a recital. Polite, brief, and already thinking of the next act. Choosing trade school over a 4-year degree felt like dropping a live wire at that table. I remember telling Mark and Lisa in the kitchen, light over the sink like a spotlight, and watching their faces rearrange. "We just thought you'd go to state," my dad said, trying to find a sentence that didn't sound like blame. Mom clapped because clapping is a habit there, not a permission. At the next Sunday, Margaret offered one of those old speeches where the triumph of proper choices is displayed like trophies on a mantle. She praised Ryan for sticking to the straight road and called vocational work temporary in the same breath, as if labor was a phase you outgrow. The applause that followed felt like permission to exclude me. I learned from those small cuts how to hide bruises. I stopped bringing up bids and bids reports that mattered to me. I stopped showing pictures of the small jobs that felt like proof instead of pleas. When I tried to explain runoff control or client deposits, they smiled like they understood the words but not the weight behind them. I watched Ryan be handed authority and trust because he fit the picture of what the family valued: steady, clean, ambitious in the approved way. Each assignment and accolade he received was another brick placed between me and the table. They never saw that my pride wasn't smaller than theirs, it was differently built. The slow accumulation of those moments made leaving feel less dramatic than practical. I remember the night I moved, the boxes in the back of my truck echoing against a cheap rented motel bed, and not once did the house feel like a home anymore. I didn't storm out. I just stopped attending Sunday narratives that insisted on measuring people by titles I didn't want. I'd laugh now to say I left because I wanted to. But really I left because every conversation at Margaret's had turned into a quiet verdict about who belonged and who was the charming exception. There were times I tried to bridge the gap, like the time I fixed a broken section of Ryan's fence and asked nothing in return, and he thanked me with the efficiency of someone who hadn't noticed I'd been overlooked for years. It's a small cruelty, gratitude given as if for a favor rather than recognition of competence, and each instance stacked on top of the next until the pile was too high to climb. Their gestures toward me read like footnotes, kind in isolation but cumulative in their erasure. That is what made the rift a root rather than a crack. It fed itself on slightness until the tree of us changed shape. So the estrangement wasn't one event. It was a pattern of seeding arrangements and microapplause, of comments that labeled my work cute and temporary while they put Ryan on a pedestal. Those were the slow cuts that taught me to count my hours and not my invitations. I learned to measure respect by contracts and delivered projects instead of Sunday nods, and the gap between us hardened into something that felt like survival rather than rebellion. When I look back now, I see how those dinners scheduled the future where I'd either be small or I'd leave. And I chose leaving because at least it let me build. I packed a few boxes into the back of my truck and moved into a 420 square foot converted garage apartment because the math made more sense than pretending anything else did. The place smelled like old paint, and the van I slept in that first week had dented memories. A single bulb hung over a folding table where I drew plans and ate cold takeout. I took out a $25,000 loan using that truck as collateral and promised a banker I'd pay it back on terms that felt like a dare. I didn't tell anyone the interest rate. I told myself the truck was a tool, not a burden. Nights became school and church and work all at once. I taught myself irrigation flow tables from a bent manual, learned hardscaping by watching tape and doing it wrong until it stopped being wrong, and stood in permitting offices until clerks started recognizing my name. Supplier reps learned to route quotes through me because I kept showing up with cash and a short temper over delays. I learned the small rules that make big jobs possible: how to read a soil report, how to sequence deliveries so dump fees didn't eat margins, how to set a deposit that people couldn't weasel out of. Every night I fell asleep to the hum of an old heater and the list of things I had to do tomorrow. I hustled weekends for $900 to $1,300 because that was what clients would pay me to rip out a bad bed or resod a lawn and then come back and praise it the way a preacher praises a miracle. The first 5 clients were a scattering of small needs: a bored realtor who wanted curb appeal before a listing, an elderly couple who wanted a low-maintenance yard so they could travel, a boutique that wanted planters for its storefront. I counted every check like a measurement, and I learned to invoice like my rent depended on it because it did. I put about $18,500 away by the time I finished high school, a stubborn pile of cash under a mattress of receipts and gritty optimism. The small victories felt huge because they were earned in nights that left fingerprints on everything. The first time a before and after photo I posted of a neglected Victorian's turnaround went viral on a local page, my phone didn't stop buzzing for 2 weeks. Strangers called and messaged and posted, and suddenly my name meant something beyond neighborhood gossip. That post rewired how I thought about visibility. I learned to frame work for an audience that might turn into customers. The viral moment didn't pay the bills overnight, but it filled the pipeline with enough leads that I could stop saying yes to cheap, soul-numbing jobs. The first substantial subcontract came from a contractor who needed help on a downtown courtyard renovation. They were nervous handing off scope to a small shop, but the Victorian photos had given me credibility. The contract was not glamorous, gravel beds, drainage, paver resets, but the check cleared and I had enough to hire 2 crew members and rent a meaner trailer. Hiring them felt like a weight lifting. I showed them how to set grades and how to respect a client's time because I remembered being ghosted by clients once I was young and cheap. We worked sun up to dark, and the work started to look like a business instead of a long series of lucky days. I pushed every spare dollar back into Summit Landscapes because growth is a slow, patient violence. You reinvest hard to make the machine run cleaner. Tools, better transport, a small office, a website that didn't look like a hobby, each purchase tightened the seams until referrals became a thing that paid salaries. There were terrified nights when a missed permit or a backordered stone could have broken us, but I learned to read risk like a map. The armor I built was practical. Contracts with clear clauses, insurance that actually covered what it said it covered, and a savings buffer that stopped me from signing away everything for a momentary win. The truth is I wasn't trying to prove them wrong as much as I was proving to myself that I could make a life that didn't ask permission. The work hardened me in good ways, the kind that gives you patience, a tolerance for failure, and a refusal to let guilt be the lever anyone else uses on you. Looking back, the fear and the small victories are the architecture of this life. They explain how a converted garage and a worn truck turned into a company with a name on a door and a crew that shows up when it rains. And they make whatever I own now feel earned rather than borrowed. The year everything felt different started with a bid I almost didn't put my name on, and it showed up on a wet Tuesday like a dare. I walked the 10,000 square foot estate like a man learning to read a new language, grades, drainage, specimen trees that needed moving not killing, and I wrote a plan that left room for beauty and for the math to work. That job alone was a turning point. Heavy equipment, careful trucking schedules, a planting palette that mattered, and a client who trusted me enough to let me redesign the bones of their property. It was the kind of work that makes a portfolio stop being a promise and start being proof. Soon after that estate, a downtown hotel called about a rooftop installation that would test everything we had learned about logistics. We were hoisting soil and planters with a crane and balancing irrigation lines where wind could undo a year of labor in one winter. The rooftop job taught me about coordination on a scale that meant subcontractors mattered as much as crew loyalty. I learned to talk to architects without apologizing for being a landscaper, and to get permits in the sequence that saved days and dollars. The rooftop was visible from parking decks and city blogs, and for the first time my work sat above the street in a way people noticed when they caught coffee on their way to meetings. Between the estate and the rooftop came the private club renovation where we rebuilt tees, reworked drainage, and made a back nine feel like a new course. That job had a rhythm like a golf swing, long arcs of planning and short, precise execution windows. The club was picky about turf, about sight lines, and about how a new path would change members' habitual walks. We did the math until the margins cleared, and the members started handing out compliments that felt like checks in a bank of validation. Those 3 projects were a run where timing and skill collided. Together they added up to roughly $2.6 million in contracts over 10 months, a number I wrote down in the ledger, and then slept like a man who'd finally stopped hanging by his fingertips. With that work came growth that was not fancy but necessary. I hired a 3rd crew because you can only push volume so far before quality slips, and I bought commercial-grade equipment so the mowers stopped being excuses and started being tools that returned on investment. We hired a designer for the millwork because I had ideas about walnut beams and I didn't want them to look like a hobby anymore. The designer made the joinery sing and turned custom pieces into a language. I leased a better trailer and started bidding on projects in Atlanta and Louisville, not because I wanted to brag, but because markets that felt big meant stability if you could deliver reliably. The money shifted the conversation with banks from how long have you been in business to what collateral do you have. Investors began to look twice because steady work means predictable cash flow. The big step was buying 6 acres outside Franklin, Tennessee, a place that felt small enough to remember where I'd come from and big enough to be permanent. I remember standing in winter wind on that dirt and thinking about a workshop with 3 bays, a heated stone entry, and a house that fit into the land instead of fighting it. Buying that land felt like buying myself time. There was a single contract that feels like the hinge of it all, about $360,000 for a commercial renovation that required speed and trust. And when that check cleared, it pushed Summit Landscapes into sustainable profitability. Not overnight rich, not private jet language, but a company that could hold payroll without me having to gamble on one more weekend job. That contract paid for the machinery upgrades, for the designer's work, and for a buffer that meant I could say no to desperate bids that would kill margins. It turned a decade of hustle into a business that could be planned instead of patched. What made the money real wasn't the numbers. It was the silence from the folks who once listened to every small triumph until it fit their script. When those contracts landed, I expected a call, Grandma Margaret, Dad, maybe Ryan saying something half proud and awkward. There was nothing. No invite, no text, no congratulations saved between scrolling and dinner. That absence was a statement as loud as any check. It told me they'd measured me by old rules and hadn't noticed that the rules had changed. I felt the success not as a rebuttal but as a quiet recalibration. I'd built something they didn't believe could exist under my hands, and their disbelief felt like an earned separation. So we expanded machine by machine, crew by crew, project by project, and the work started paying for the life I wanted rather than a life that fit someone else's map. The contracts were proof and the payroll was a promise. To the guys who showed up, to myself for every night in that garage apartment, and to the idea that choosing a different path didn't mean choosing less. I kept my life quiet online on purpose, because loud profiles make it easy for people to judge and harder for me to control the story. I posted before and after shots that were tight and clean, a Victorian restored, a rooftop green bed, a private club green rebuilt from the roots. No family pictures, no selfies of the house at dusk, nothing that shouted address or names. My posts were business cards dressed as catalogs, professional images, short captions about soil and schedule, and a mail address that was strictly for invoices. That silence felt like armor. Then the chain started slow and careless. A cousin spotted my new truck idling at the hardware store, the one on the corner where contractors trade stories and parts, and he sent a photo to a group text with a laughing emoji. A woman I'd been seeing casually tagged a picture from brunch without thinking, and in the blurry background someone could make out the outline of our house from the street. That tag was the kind of mistake you let slide if you don't want trouble, but in this family small openings are invitations. The truck photo and the brunch tag were tiny leaks that became maps. Likes came first, then the texts that were praise with teeth. "Looks great, Jacob," one cousin wrote, like a compliment wrapped in reconnaissance. "So proud of you," Margaret texted, a message that felt like an audition for warmth. Then the asks began, threaded into the praise so precisely they could be read as charity or business depending on how easy you were. Ryan texted about legal fees from a messy divorce and framed it like a problem that needed family discretion, as if the family name could be lent. Jessica floated a family venture on a call, all emotion and spreadsheets, as if I'd be the missing capital to make them whole. They tried to dress requests up as opportunity. David brought up an investment that needed a $12,000 seed. The number said plainly in text so there could be no mistake. "Seed capital," he typed, "a modest amount to get everyone on board." The tone was clinical. The ask was packaged as mutual gain, a project where my money would return with interest and we'd all be closer because we'd have put skin in the game. The grammar of that message was entitlement. You contribute, we all benefit, and you'll be allowed back into the photo. They threaded morality through the math and expected that to carry me. I ignored the messages for a long while because every ask from them had previously come with strings they never named out loud but expected you to tie. Ignoring felt like a test they couldn't score. I read their texts late at night with the heater clicking under the bench and told myself not to answer from a place of guilt. When Ryan mentioned his fees, I thought about the times I lent him money for gas and never got a thank you. And when David talked about seed capital, I imagined them treating my work as an ATM rather than a life. There was a slow, cold recognition in every line. They were doing reconnaissance. When they arrived in person, it was staged and tidy, the kind of ambush that thinks manners make theft polite. They claimed a detour from a distant family reunion, an accidental plan that put them nearby and suddenly at my gate. The texts I'd ignored sat in my phone like evidence, and their presence felt like a verdict made public. They smiled and whispered, glancing at the shop and the truck as if they'd finally found answers. I watched them on the camera feed and tasted the old pattern, praise and then leverage. The same choreography that had excluded me for years now practiced with the confidence of appetite. The whole thing smelled of entitlement, like someone coming in expecting to be fed because they remembered the table, not because they remembered how to help clear the dishes. I open the door because standing there watching them through a screen starts to feel like surveillance instead of ownership, and they walk in like people who expect to be invited. The workshop greets them first. A grinder is humming in the corner even though I haven't turned it on, the sound bleeding from the next bay and making the air feel active. There are racks of tools that are used and polished, not staged. The smell is metal and oil and sawdust in the way honest work smells, and the light through the open bay door cuts the dust into slow, floating ledgers of the days I've kept. They move through the shop with that measured curiosity of people who think property is a museum and not a life. I lead them past the lift where a commercial mower sits like a tool with purpose, past a pallet of pavers stacked the way I like them for easy access, and into the office that looks like bookkeeping made sober. Framed invoices line one wall, real numbers, dates, signatures, and a cheap plaque with the company name that used to be a joke on my first secretary's desk. Awards hang beside permits in a corner, not trophies for vanity but markers that clients trusted us with large sums, and we returned the work well. Jessica's voice softens the way it always does when she finds a line she can use. "Oh, Jacob, this is really something." Margaret's hands fumble on a stack of business cards like they are the proof she remembers wanting to see. They step into the kitchen and the air changes. It's built for heavy entertaining with a Long Island commercial-grade range and a refrigerator that can swallow a weekend's worth of catering. I watch them notice the counters, the flow from kitchen to dining, the hidden pantry details that say I meant to host, not to hide. Their eyes keep skimming back to the shop door as if deciding which is more useful, the man who built the place or the place itself. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows the pond sits flat and quiet like an idea finally made physical. The surface reflects the barn-blue winter sky and the native grasses at the edge ripple under birdsong. They stand there a moment, taking in the view, and you can see the calculations begin behind the faces. "Imagine if we did this together," Jessica says, turning the view into a slide for a pitch. "A family landscaping franchise, your name, our network. We can start small, multiple locations, franchises in Nashville, Atlanta." The language is corporate and familiar, as if she's been practicing the next conversation without ever having offered time when I was scraping by. David moves in like a dentist with a diagnosis, soft and efficient. "And Ryan needed help with legal fees," he says, as if the sentence itself is a kindly bridge they expect me to cross. He mentions specifics in a voice that implies I already agreed: court costs, an attorney retainer, maybe $12,000 to cover a chunk of it. His eyes flick to framed invoices on the wall and back again, like he's taking mental receipts. He couches it in family terms. "We're not asking for charity, think of it as an interest-bearing arrangement. You'd be invested in us." The math is small enough to feel plausible and large enough in sentiment to demand a reaction. Ryan stands near the window while Ashley clicks away with her phone, angles the beams and the pond into a dozen images she'll probably post. He looks awkward, hands in his coat pockets, not owning the ask but carried by it anyway. Caleb and Noah shift from subtle praise into practical proposals. A local manager position cut for family, introductions to their contacts, leverage of my name to land clients in exchange for a percentage they never name without a hands-on clause. The requests are small and precise: seed money, a partnership slice, a few introductions, with a subtext so loud it could be heard without their lips moving. "Now that your name matters, you'll underwrite ours." They frame everything as mutual benefit, but the offer is a net that takes. They ask me to fund legal fees as if loyalty comes stamped with a receipt, to front $12,000 as seed money so something they'll manage can use my credit, and to let them wear my brand like a borrowed suit. The language betrays the plan. They want access to what I built without acknowledging the nights or the loans or the way I ate ramen while they sat at the table. I stand there listening and cataloging, hands folded, because it's the most honest posture I have left in front of people who learn to value appearances over the work that makes them possible. The camera I left pointed at the entry lingers on my hands long before I speak. A close-up of palms that still carry a film of sawdust and the faint silver of metal filings, the shot steady and merciless. I feel the hum of a grinder from the next bay in my bones and notice how calm my fingers look on the knob, because I have learned to make my face do the work of not falling apart. I open the door with the kind of slow motion that keeps people from filling the silence with noise. and they shuffle in like a crowd stepping into a living room they assume they own. I let them take the tour, but I keep my voice low and precise, because facts land harder when they are simple and steady. You've not spoken to me in 7 years, I say, and for months I got texts that were 2 parts praise and 1 part asking. I say the exact things they tried to gloss over, the photos I was cut out of, the jokes that wrapped my work as cute, the graduation applause that sounded like pity more than pride. I list the mechanics of a life they didn't build, permits in folders, payroll numbers framed on the wall, the contract that made us self-sustaining, and I speak without drama because drama looks like weakness to people asking for money. When Jessica slides into the part about a franchise and David begins to speak the language of seed capital and Ryan's legal fees, I pick the specifics apart the way I would a bad invoice. $12,000, I say, naming their number so it can't hide inside feelings. That's not small to me because you weren't here while I earned it. You want a return on my name without returning the courtesy of time. I won't do that. I tell them quietly that I've already shown a lawyer what these conversations could look like if they grew teeth. I've already talked to my manager about protecting payroll and client lists. I am more prepared for their tactics than they think. I make the boundary clear without theatrics because boundaries are work, not drama. I won't bankroll entitlement, I say, and the line is a thing you can see in the room like a shadow. I will not trade my company for approval that you refused to give when I needed it most. If you think this is a negotiation, know I have contracts, insurance, and counsel willing to enforce them. I don't raise my voice, I don't need to. Saying it in plain language makes the ask sound smaller and meaner than they hoped it would. For a beat, they try to reframe their asks into family duty and mutual gain, the old pattern, a little praise, a little favor, a weigh-in. Their excuses are warmed over and smell like convenience. We're having a hard time, Ryan says, voice thin as if hardship earns priority. We thought family would help. Margaret murmurs something about pride and support. Their sentences crater under the weight of their past choices. The words don't mend the years of small cuts, the shifted chairs, the polite applause. I let them speak because silence would let them fill the space with lies. They file past me to the door when I tell them to leave, fingers touching the rails as if they'll catch something that belongs to them. They murmur apologies that sound rehearsed, and their faces are the color of embarrassment, the same faces that once sat at the table without doing the work that earned any seat. Jessica reaches for a last line about family first, and I answer only with a nod because I've learned the difference between a sentence and a life. They walk down the circular drive under the winter sun and pack into Ryan's battered sedan and the rented SUV, the tires stirring light frost that shows where they've been. I close the door behind them slowly, listen for the engine hum to die in the distance, and walk back to my bench with a step that feels measured and honest. I set the wrench down in the tray with a click that sounds like a period after a sentence, precise and final. I sit for a moment, shoulders unclenching like a man who has been holding something in for a long time, and I let the quiet be enough. I breathe out a single private relief that is all mine. I do not owe them my life. The driveway is empty and the frost keeps the memory of their footprints like a map, each print leading away from the house I built, and I look at those small, fading tracks and choose work, loyalty, and the people who showed up when it mattered.